Now to our Sunday special. Energy for all by 2030 is one of the United Nations targets on its Sustainable Development Goals. But developing countries like Nigeria, confronted with a myriad of challenges in its energy sector, may fall short in meeting this objective. In this report, supported by the African Center for Development Journalism, TVCNEWS correspondent Esther Omopariola examines energy access in Nigeria's commercial center, Lagos, and seeks to find solutions that will ensure sustainable and equitable energy.
My quest in this story started with me and my crew visiting a resident who lives in an upscale neighborhood in Lagos. Before the chat began, we could see his home had access to energy, but it wasn't from the national grid. "24 hours of constant power supply from the national grid is just a dream," says Dr. Ofua, a veterinarian who now depends on solar power to run his home and workplace. With about 3.2 million naira, Dr. Ofua was able to install solar power energy at his home in Aja, an upscale neighborhood in Lagos. He says it is cost-effective and a cleaner energy source compared with diesel or fuel-powered generators. Although his apartment is still connected to the national grid, he tells me solar energy powers every electrical appliance at his home and workplace.
Imagine the lockdown, the 4 months plus of no movement and all that. You couldn't go to get petrol and all that. And the kids were in the house, they needed to be entertained. So that aspect was 120% satisfied and all that. So yes, the solar power I have in the house satisfies that need for constant power. My refrigerator works properly. And then also I have the house at times operates as a store for the excess drugs and whatnot, consumables that I use in the hospital. So I'm able to store in the house. And then when we need at the hospital, I supply the hospital from the house.
He tells me he doesn't worry about safety at night because the solar energy provides him added security.
Now we know these nefarious characters, they work in the dark of the day, and when the national grid is epileptic, they have a field day. My family member has been robbed that way. Is when you're using the generator in the dead of the night, 10, 11, 1 a.m., they jump into your compound, switch off the generator, or pull the plug of the generator. So the gen is working, but you don't have power in the house. What's the next thing any normal human being will do? You want to go and check what's going on because you're wasting energy. Immediately you open the door. He opened the door to check what was on. They put a gun to his head, stepped into the house and robbed him. But right now with the solar system, it's hybrid. I don't even know when there's power. I don't know when I'm on solar. I don't know when it's automatic. Everything can happen. So I do not have any cause to come outside in the dead of the night for any reason.
Shortly after this interview, we got news that a transformer nearby in the vicinity was on fire. But it was quickly put out by some of the neighbors here. By this unfortunate incident, power supply from the grid was already cut off in the neighborhood. Power supply remains a major challenge for Nigeria's growing population. Here in Badagry, residents tell me this has taken a heavy toll on their businesses and household commitments, especially in the midst of rising costs of energy, which has rendered life quite unbearable. Joseph Abiodun operates a football viewing center in Badagry, but chose not to appear on camera. He uses only fuel-powered generating set to run his business because the power supply in this area is erratic, and he cannot pay the energy bills, which he feels aren't quite commensurate to what he often gets. He says this has greatly put a strain on his finances, even on the home front.
Someone having 3 children, you have to pay for the school fees of the 3 of them. You want to maintain the viewing center. When you look at all those aspects, it is money that will be spent on them. So spending on this aspect will surely affect the home whereby the money that we are supposed to make use of at home sometimes are being converted back to the business, just to make sure that the business continues moving.
I had a chance of speaking with Solomon Okwayemi, a family man who runs a business center in Badagry. He says power is rationed here, which affects his business operations and forces him to spend an average of 70,000 naira every month to generate his own power supply.
Cost of buying fuel now is very high. It's on the high side, and it's to a large extent is affecting the business because of the costs. And at this, from it, we still pay staff and the likes. It makes the take home in the business makes the business look not profitable. Yeah, to a large extent, sometimes paying children's school fees is a difficult thing. Most of the money we make here, we put it on running energy, buying fuel to run this business. So most of the time, we beg the school management to allow these children in school until we gather things and pay the debt that we've incurred.
Home to more than 20 million people, the energy needs for Lagos should be about 20,000 megawatts, going by global development standards of 1,000 megawatts per 1 million people. But currently, the state receives about 1,000 megawatts from the national grid, while data from the Lagos State Electricity Board show that 15 gigawatts, equivalent to 15,000 megawatts of power, are generated from off-grid sources, an indication that only 5% of Lagos' energy needs is met by the national grid, which currently generates less than 4,000 megawatts daily. By this indication, most households in Lagos spend 3,000 naira or more weekly on electricity and petrol for power generating sets. The National Bureau of Statistics has pegged the number of households in Lagos at about 4.6 million, with the average number per household put at 5. By implication, 4.6 million households would be spending 14 billion naira weekly on energy. Many who cannot cope with this energy challenge to sustain their livelihoods have switched to other means of meeting daily needs. Mrs. Onyenwe Celine, a widow and a petty trader, tells me she had to quit selling frozen foods to sell non-perishable foodstuffs just to make ends meet. She is hoping for a time when power supply will be constant in her community so that she can return to her former business, which she says is more profitable.
They are not giving us light the time they're supposed to give us. So when I buy my frozen food, I put inside my refrigerator. Before you know it, it starts spoiling because of no light. If you keep on buying fuel, you cannot meet up. The money you use and buy your goods, you will not see. Your gain, you will not see. So this thing really affected me so much. So I have to quit for the business and join another one that cannot decay easily like that.
And just like Mrs. Celine, Mrs. Agatha Akabueze had to shift to selling non-perishable foodstuffs because of the epileptic power supply in this low-income community. She tells me her family barely watches television to know what is happening, and she doesn't have the means of constantly buying petrol just to keep the lights on.
The lights make my children to be happy because when there is light, this Go TV we are recharging. We are just recharging it, so we are not watching it because there is no light. School fees is there. My children, I have 2 children at university. So school fees for the little ones, they are still paying school fees. So at the end of the day, you make nothing. But if there is light, children will know what is going on everywhere. But now, they doesn't know because by the time they say, Mommy, buy fuel today, Mommy, buy fuel tomorrow. It's only the day that I can buy, I'll buy.
This mission hospital, Our Lady and St. Francis Catholic Hospital in Badagry, provides its own means of energy to run its day-to-day operations. It depends on solar energy and diesel-powered generating sets to fully function and provide medical services in this low-income community. Reverend Sister Justina is an administrative officer of the medical facility and tells me the amount spent on generating power supply alone outweighs the total costs of hospital operations.
We spend about 150 to 160,000 naira on diesel alone in a month. And this is because we rely mostly on solar. We're lucky that the capacity of the solar we have can power most of our equipment in the laboratory, which normally comes on almost all the time, every day. You know, as the patients come, they run tests. So our reliance on generator is more of when we have surgery, when we want to sterilize, when we want to pump water, that's when we rely on generator. And also when the solar fails at night.
With an installed capacity of 13,000 megawatts and peak generation of about 4,000 megawatts, the national grid has collapsed for a record 7 times this year and left business and homes for several hours without power supply. Insufficient generation and load rejection has been attributed as the major cause of the frequent grid collapse, as well as attacks on power towers, which also create problems in the system.
The energy sector reforms that were undertaken about 5 years ago has actually produced an energy market and an energy system that is one of the best in the world on paper. It's the operation of it that needs to be properly articulated. We have a 3-tier system: generation, distribution, and transmission. Transmission is still in the government hands, and that's a challenge which needs to change such that when the transmission changes and is broken up into constituent parts that are manageable, then you have a better operational efficiency. And that's what we will not experience the same challenges that we have today.
Recently, the federal government unveiled the Nigeria Energy Transition Plan, which is expected to improve power supply, and gas will play a major role as a transition fuel in Nigeria's net zero pathway. Although the plan might be laudable, but the use of gas as an alternative energy source has been criticized as a viable option.
Natural gas or fossil gas releases a lot of methane, which is more dangerous to the climate in the short term than carbon dioxide. So we must never forget that. In the gas fields, along the gas pipeline, there are leakages and there are pollutants. And so if anybody is going to use gas, we should not predicate the usage of gas on the fact that it's good for the climate. It is not. Well, it is very clear that the best solution for meeting the energy needs of any people in the world today is to use renewable energy, which could be solar, it could be wind. So we need to move to renewable energy, train our workers to be able to step into the jobs that will be created, because it's going to create massive jobs.
In the midst of worsening power crisis, solar energy is gradually meeting the needs of some unserved electricity consumers. To this end, the Council for Renewable Energy in Nigeria recently identified over 100 million untapped market opportunities in Nigeria's solar market. It is believed to be the easiest and fastest way to power the state and the entire country, even though there are challenges which are perceived to hinder this objective.
When it comes to solar energy, there are a lot of myths in the industry today that solar does not work. Solar actually works, and solar can power Nigeria. It has the capacity of powering Nigeria because the sun is always available and it's free and renewable. Most solar panels are imported. And I think in 2018 there was this increase in tariff by customs. It was increased from 5% to 10%. I feel to make it cheaper in Nigeria, it has to be zero. The federal government has a role to play in that regard by reducing the tariff, maybe from 10% to zero. At least it should be something like a subsidy in the solar energy industry, especially for persons who are willing to invest into the business or into the solar business.
Electricity in Nigeria is on the concurrent list of the Nigerian Constitution, where both state and federal governments can make laws regarding energy access. But the states have simply lined up behind the government and worked on their rules to try and ensure that it works. According to the Lagos state government, it has contributed about 270 megawatts to the national grid, but that hasn't guaranteed steady power supply to its ever-increasing population. But now, the government says it is looking at passing new laws to enable the state regulate its own power supply to ensure every Lagosian have access to energy. In addition to this, the Lagos Commissioner for Energy Resources, Engineer Odushote, revealed that the state plans to explore sustainable alternatives to guarantee steady power supply, even in rural communities.
Better intervene in the lives of the people of Lagos by ensuring adequate supply of electricity. That has meant that we're now looking at passing new laws that allow us to regulate electricity in Lagos as is envisaged or as was envisaged by the Constitution.
And there was a bit of hope that by 2036, every Lagosian will have access to power supply, only if certain conditions are met to ensure this is achieved.
So if you look at the policy, we've been clear that if we're able to stay the course as we have been, get the laws passed in a timely manner, start to encourage investments to come, by 2036, everybody in Lagos will have electricity access.
Access to electricity remains a peculiar challenge in Lagos State and Nigeria at large, and data indicates that citizens and businesses spend a disproportionate amount of money to privately generate their minimum energy needs. Many cannot even afford this. There is great expectation that the policies, plans and initiatives geared towards guaranteeing equal energy access for all is achieved in the shortest possible time and in the most sustainable way.